Hello, everyone.
And welcome to RCS Rocking Chair Sessions, Volume 98 with artist Eurydice. Also, your last name is not really one that you use, so we'll just leave it with your first name. So you're kind of like Prince.
Yeah.
When did you decide to kind of like just get rid of the last name and just stick to the first name?
Oh, I decided when I was 15.
What? That's amazing. You're like, I already know.
I was like, fuck the patriarchy. I never wanted, it was like in my little, diary with the childish handwriting. I vow not to use my father's name, so I don't belong to him, so he doesn't control me, and I do not shame him with my disobedience.
That is so,
and I stuck with it. Yeah, I didn't want to be owned by a male, the dad or the husband. I didn't want to be passed around as chattel. So I knew the patriarchy like from day one. I was born aware.
And do you think that's kind of sort of like with a heavier influence in Greece where you're from, or just in Europe overall, just like this kind of like the daughter as the role of like having to like obey the father and that type of thing? How was that for you growing up?
Clearly more, religious groups, families, and social groups feel it more strongly. I mean, look what's happening in the Muslim world, in the Orthodox, especially Muslim world. So my grandfather was a priest, an Orthodox priest, and both of my parents came from a small village on the island of Lesbos. So I'm a born lesbian. My mom was married to my father because her father chose him. So my dad she wasn't involved in it, went and asked for her hand after he asked his brother's permission, and when everybody agreed, they would just married off. She'd never seen a penis, and his is the only penis she ever saw. She didn't know like how babies are made until, she had sex. So like I'm sure the early sex was rape, because they had no words for any of it, none. The body was never part of a discourse at all. And God was very present in all of that stuff. So definitely, I would say a little more, repressed. And within that world, woman doesn't have a voice. In the old country, so in the village, they were still closer to like the ancient religions. So my mother's grandmother, who my mother is named after, who my daughter is named after, Futini, it means like enlightened and sunlight and like epiphany. So she was the village wise woman and the healer, and she would do like the herbs and all that stuff for people who get sick or get bitten by snakes or insects or couldn't have a baby, or the charms, and her husband was the butcher.
So she had all the bones.
So they were like,
great combination.
Like the hierarchy.
Yeah, I love it.
But my parents moved to Athens, the capital. So
that was a big change.
That's a big change, and there, woman has zero power because she becomes. We enter suddenly like from the agricultural era, we go into the Romance. So she becomes the object, the damsel in distress, and she's got like nothing to do but maybe at most make lunch and dinner. So I was like 3 when we moved, 2 or 3. I had already taught myself to read, so I had a keen understanding of what was happening, and I saw the shift. I saw it. I was able to articulate it, is what I mean, right? So I was pretty fluent with logos and what its uses early on. So I saw my mom basically sit at home. I mean, she has, to this day, she's never had a bank account or a job or, an initiative or a say in how things are run. So this was like my role model. So by default, I had to like copy my dad, because there was, otherwise it was, suicide or jump off the cliff. So in my like hero's journey, I chose to copy the male gaze, you know, and the male eye, because there was no other eye, there was no other, you know, actor. And then when I became like a preteen and started having opinions of my own that didn't like parrot his, he became very angry and felt betrayed. And, you know, there was a lot of like emotional incest there, which is when, because I was precocious and intelligent, and so he used me as the mate. On the emotional level, you know, he would take me like to the embassy and have me recite the Odyssey.
That was in the States already?
No, that was in Athens.
In Athens.
My parents never came to the States.
Oh, they're still in Athens?
Yeah, they're still on the island of Crete. So, like I had to, you know, recite the Odyssey for the minister, where my dad worked in the ministry of information, no less. So, when I became a preteen, there was an uprising in Athens, which I saw against the junta. So I also grew up during the junta. Yeah, right. So I saw the, you know, the students that were much older, university students who were like shot. The tanks came out, you know, to bring down
the student
uprising. The student
uprising,
right?
Or protests mainly, right?
Well, yeah.
Or was it more than protests?
It became a kind of a countrywide uprising eventually, and the junta, you know, was overthrown. It took about a year and a half of unrest. There was some, you know, war with Turkey that started that never happened over Cyprus. And in the process of all of that, my dad saw that like the government that had supported him was going to fall apart. So he got a job on Crete and teaching at the university, at the new university, and we moved there. Because employment and politics is so tightly, you know, wound in the old world. And in Crete, I once again, you know, realized how different I was from my peers. It had happened in Athens, and then it happened in Crete. And I'll backtrack in a minute and tell you that part. But to continue the narrative of like the patriarchy's control, I started having opinions in Crete. You know, I wanted to join the Communist Youth Party because a lot of these students were communists, and you know, I thought they were such heroes, right? And people were dying, so it was a revolutionary time. I wanted a little tiny part of it at like age 13 or whatever it was. And he turned on me. I understand why. You know, he got really scared. His politics were very right wing. And he started physically beating me up to get me to obey. And kind of like saying no to everything I would come up with. Like I wanted to join a theater group. Oh, no. That's like, you know, low-class people, you know, entertainers are just like a tiny step above prostitutes. Yeah, there is no respect for that sort of work. And, you know, all of that old world criticism, judgment, and prejudice came at me, you know, no matter what I chose to do. I organized some protests at the school against the leadership of the school, and we wouldn't attend classes. My dad's super upset, you know, beat me up, blah, blah, blah. So I did a lot of that. I was kind of I was the president of the high school. And, well, yeah. We would write at night, graffiti on the walls. So I would say my first public artwork.
Were the graffiti on the school walls?
On the walls of the neighborhood, up and down. And then, like, you know, boys would write to me on the walls, you know, big signs. And it was a time of, you know, romantic revolution. So at the end of which I just left home. And I was 15. And I had saved money. I was gonna go to my cousin's wedding in New York the year before, so I had a visa. I ended up not going. My dad went alone, we didn't have the money, but I like saved all my lunch money for like 3 years, ate my friends' leftovers, and I flew to Hollywood. Not even, I mean, I flew to LAX, but like I wanted to go to Hollywood.
At
so
15.
I took the bus from LAX to Hollywood.
That's a long
which
ride.
Did not look at all like what I thought it would.
How surprising was that?
I mean, can you imagine? I don't know what I thought, but I thought like, you know,
Sounds
movie
so
stars and
glamorous.
yeah, and it wasn't.
I'm going to Hollywood.
I know. It was like, you know, Times Square. I mean, it was just like seedy. But anyway, I ended up getting lucky, and I met a woman there who was, a friend of the Greeks who loved the language, the dances, the food. Had been to Greece many times. She was a librarian, and she let me stay with her at least, at the beginning temporarily, and then I stayed for the full year. So she became my alternate maternal role model or feminine role model, which helped a lot. However, belatedly, she was divorced. She didn't clean all day. She threw her dirty laundry in the back of the car and took it to the Chinese laundry. She had a dog who slept with her indoors. I was like, oh my God, I can do all that? And I've done all of that since.
Liberation.
My dogs are in my bed right now. Right? Hallelujah for her. So anyway, so part of my path was giving up on my language, my all of my familiar stuff, and there was no place for me in my own world, and I always like to give the example of living the little town of Heraklion, Crete, and arriving in LA. I went to Redondo Union High School, where I graduated from. And the first week, the kids I had just met took me to see Rocky Horror Picture Show, because it was around Halloween by then. I came in September, I think. And I was like, I've landed on another planet. Where am I? And who are these people? And how could they be doing all this stuff? It was just, I can tell you, all the synapses. It was such a non-stop, yeah. And everybody was, sleeping with everybody, and getting high, joints, giving blowjobs. I wouldn't even have a word that I knew, at least, of a blowjob. So it was, it was huge shift. And I've done a few more in my life like that, where I went to another, I lived in India for 3 years, planned to live there forever. So I've done it a couple of times more, where I went to completely different place and started over and learned from them, and modeled myself a little after them, because I found it expanding and liberating from the bounds of the self, so limited. But to retract a little, another defining factor of who I am and my practice as an artist was being a lesbian, which I always hid. And I just think it's fascinating, and it has never stopped being part of my work, is the fact that this one word, right, that completely accidentally, because this woman who was a talented poet, who wrote poetry about women, describing their beauty, and even though she had a daughter and a husband, and she was exiled for her politics by the tyrant, had to go to Syracuse, came back, she had a brother, wrote other poems about, her brother or her daughter. She was judged specifically by the potency and fluency of her logos, which is male. She was able to use it successfully. And within maybe 2 generations, she was demonized. And then once, of course, we had the new church, forget it, everything was burned, banned. So we have only one poem intact, which was copied as an example of the meter, by a Roman editor, let's say. And then everything else is tiny fragments found in papyri that were used to wrap fish in the desert in Egypt. And yet, on the basis of that, for over 2,000 years now, for 2,500 years, her last name, which at the time, in ancient times, was where you were from, so the toponym, has come to signify female perversion in every language, all around the fucking planet, right? And that's patriarchy, which I didn't understand at the time, that part, but I understood the power of words, and I understood that I didn't want to tell in school that I was a lesbian, so they would ask us where we're from, and I would lie and say, I'm from Athens, or I mean, from America, I would make up all kinds of stories because I was afraid, like, my girlfriends wouldn't want to hang out with me because they would find out I'm such a pervert, you know. The shame was just something so minor that comes with like a word, a simple word, and how it affected me, you know, early on. And then I had a teacher explain it to me, and you know, kind of like talk about Sappho's work in elementary school. And then he hit on me, and so the whole thing became again kind of perverted in my mind. And it took a very, you know, and then I thought I must be a lesbian because I'm a lesbian with a capital L, so I must be a lesbian with a small L. And then, you know, I started masturbating young, and playing with myself made me feel even more like shamed and guilty, and oh my God, you know, I find pleasure. What is this? You know, I'm going to hell. Just all this self-hatred.
All these unspoken things.
Can you imagine, like, the load that we take on, and we are innocent children, and this is how we're formed by the system, you know, and it takes, I'm sure as you have experienced, you know, so long to like unlearn each tiny part of this, you know, like horrible lessons, right, that we've been trained by and you know, taught to follow and respect. So yeah, I had to kind of run away just to get away from the definitions of things. And I have found that each time, you know, running away has helped me, you know, I have lost opportunity, lost like job, you know, career opportunity, but I have gained, you know, sight and wisdom, and it's helped my practice.
Well, totally. I feel like even your artwork is so, it's so open, it's honest, it's very raw and realistic, and you do show like the lesbian form and the human female body very prominently, like you don't disguise it. You utilize language as well. Like there's some collages that you use. So you use it's like mixed media. Like you say, you get and you take from different places where you've been. You use the fibers, you use the paint, you use the collage. Where did you start to dabble with those things?
You know, probably like moment zero. Like the first art pieces I remember making, I was slapped on the head because I said they were saints. I don't know, I was still on Lesbos, and like one of the you know, the priest or his wife, my grandma, kept hitting me because it was like blasphemous. You can't make icons like
You couldn't paint the gods because
right.
that was
I mean, I could if I was like authorized, but I can't say this is a saint. No, it's just like your own, you know, whatever drooling that you're doing, your own little. So I think early on I already had like a sense of sacred art, or art is magic. Art is an object of transformation and like world change. And I still have, right? So I think a lot of my work is iconography in that sense. I imagine it always in ritual space. You know, like I imagine it hanging down the corridors that lead to the ancient place of worship, or I don't really want to make it ever think of it as in a home. I think of it as a more potent tool of magic, of shifting energy around.
like spirituality as well.
Right, of shifting the world energy around. So then, you know, when I send it out, I'm hoping that it will do something energetically, right? More than just like hang there and be looked at. And I put a little kind of thing in it, whatever. You know, when I work, I'm very conscious of, you know, making spell, making, you know, some, yeah. So it's just
Like bringing that in from your great grandmother.
right. It comes in, you know, there is an intensity that's higher than labor. I mean, I'm sure that it's true for everyone, you know, who's experienced what it is to do your work. You know, you go at the place above, so you're like above yourself, right? You're not you as like your daughter or your parents or your neighbors know you, you access something else and you're at that higher focus. And then that's in the work.
That energy goes
Right,
into the work.
right, yeah.
I feel that.
Yeah. And it's, you can't really, I mean, I can put it in words per se. But definitely I'm using language, yeah. So like as an undergrad, I went, right, I went to Bard where my daughter is now. And my final thesis, I was like 17, my final thesis when I graduated was a book of poetry and an illustrated manuscript. So so my art thesis, because it was a double major, and the artwork was actually the book, even though I had done lots of artwork to be an art major, you know. But it was a book that was like inspired by William Blake and the medieval illuminated manuscripts, which was like the first time that the masses had access to knowledge, right? So, and that's also something that I'm always conscious of. You know, I don't want the work to be seen as high art. I'm not a fan of conceptual art. I mean, you know, I'm not saying that I don't appreciate it in others, but I have no interest in it at all. I like to get the media, you know, like hands-on and lived in and lived fully and impassioned and recognizable by, you know, like, I don't want to say the lowest, but the grandest common denominator. So the most people who can understand something about the work, the better, you know. Which is why I like fabric and embroidery, because women of all cultures and classes have access to it. Right, they have a connection, they have a history, they have a relative, they have some, you know, personal stories. Oh, I used to stitch, oh, I used to whatever, crochet, my mom, you know. So it brings back that connection to our female ancestors, the life at the loom, you know, weaving and unweaving, well, Penelope. I'm thinking of Penelope. Sorry, I'm going to the Odyssey momentarily. She earns her, you know, her respite from the next marriage by weaving during the day her shroud and unweaving it at night. Right? Yeah.
Penelope.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So my practice kind of like was already there at that young age. You know, I was both interested in text and taking the words of logos and turning them around, making them more feminine, and in imagery for the same reason, and the female body from the get-go, like that entire, all of my work has always had the female form. So, you know, I think that, I mean, again, because I think of the work as ritual practice, the fact that the first art pieces on cave walls in like prehistory were like female bodies, you know, scratched by, you know, cave people, is important to me, you know, and the fertility ritual, you know, the relationship of the ample female figure to Mother Nature and the cycles and survival and all of that. And then, of course, you know, propaganda and what, like, you know, contemporary culture and the male gaze does to all of that. Has to be part of the consciousness and the discourse. Otherwise, we don't get out of it. If we don't see it, we can't get out of it. So I'm always trying to have that dialogue in the work of mother, you know, generator of life, right? Like the generator, and what happens to the I, which is the generator that creates more life under the male gaze of patriarchy, which is the only gaze we have. And that push and pull, you know, is just a lot of what I try to work around. And I'm dedicated to change, to shifting it a little. I mean, imperceptibly, because I'm just a little Greek. But, shifting it a little, because, so there is a political aspect to the work always, to the practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like, I do have a political goal, much more than like a monetary goal or an artistic goal. Like, if you tell me as an artist, what would be your ultimate dream? I mean, I would like as many people as possible to see the work and get something out of it. But I don't have a dream of like ever. It never occurred to me that I'd make money out of this, or like.
That wasn't your intention.
No.
You're also a writer, because I mean, it was
Right.
your MA was fine arts, but it was also in writing. When did you decide after graduating from Bard that your journey would take you to Colorado for your next
Well,
degree?
I went to Colorado because I wanted to study with, it was all romance, I wanted to study with Allen Ginsberg and Bill Burroughs, and I did, but they were at Naropa, so Naropa gives like a loser degree, sorry, if any graduates of Naropa, I hear this, no, it's a good degree, but like, doesn't help you to make money so much, so I got a master's at CU, and lots of great people were teaching there at the time. But I really wanted to get
More.
to the
So from Colorado, you went
Right.
out to the.
And from Colorado, I went to Brown because I wanted to work again with those specific people, mostly Bob Coover, who became my mentor for a long time. He still is. I mean, I just saw them this spring, and yeah. But what happened in Colorado, which kind of like changed a little bit my trajectory, was that one of my professors, the writer Ron Sukinik, gave my final thesis at that master's program to a contest which was being judged at the time because the judge had not liked any of the submissions and would not, give the award.
Wow.
So he
That's
was
impressive. He's like,
right.
I refuse all of these. None of these win.
I know, and he's just my new friend on Instagram.
That's hilarious.
And I don't know, he's like 85,
That's
7.
amazing.
Yeah.
Instagram
Yeah,
is no
and
age.
I know, and his name is Fred Tutton. I mean, I didn't, know him, he didn't know me, but he liked my thesis, and so it won that contest that I was already in India, I never submitted it.
Wow.
And I got a telex in I think I was in Shekhawati, in Rajasthan, that your
won the
book,
contest.
yeah, you won the contest, and your book is being published, because by the time I got the telex, the book was published.
Oh my goodness.
And I was,
like,
and
now I'm
I know,
like-
I never edited it, like nothing.
You're like, I'm an author now.
Yeah, and it was, of course the OCD part takes over, and it's like, I'm gonna see the book and it'll be like full of mistakes. It was not, there weren't enough drafts. And then Virago Press, which was actually a press I had long, admired, because it was the first women's press, feminist press, found the book somewhere, I don't know where, picked up a copy of that original publication, and wanted to reprint it. And the original publisher had lifelong rights, so I rewrote it so it would be different, and Virago printed it, and also I got my wish to kind of write it.
To edit it.
To edit it the way I would think it should be, so it's very different. But
That's exciting.
and then that
So 2
book,
books.
right, 2 books, and all in the
No big
span of
deal.
0
It's 2
time.
books.
And then that book, Virago's book, did really well. So it was translated in 20 languages.
What's the
and,
title of it?
And I was flown, to all these countries like Japan or Holland or
I
Italy.
remember, yeah.
Or,
What was it called?
it was
specifically?
called F-32. The Virago one is F-32, the Second Coming. And F-32 is because it's a story of a vagina. And at some point, the vagina turns into a camera lens.
Mhm.
So you see what you see through it. So it's an F-32 lens. So the book, which wasn't, I didn't even know it was going to be a book. It's like an early vagina monologues, but my opinion better. It's a fable, and and it deals with the dichotomy between like body and mind, or body and soul, or body and sense of, self, or however you want to name it. But yeah, the kind of separation that we have been forced to enter of ourselves, so we're never whole. A separation between the higher self and the lower physical self, right? So the vagina is in every sentence, and is the protagonist of the book. And the main character in the opening parts, you realize how she, being like smart, resents the vagina because it gets turned on, because guys hit on it. She gets like the catcalls in the street. She has to stop what she's doing to like get laid because it's like starts to bother her. And so her relationship to her sexuality is one of resentment. It's me and it, right? And then she's walking down the street in New York one day, and she gets assaulted and with a knife, and the assaulter cuts out her vagina, attacks her in the vagina and cuts it out. And it's pretty brutal, but then it turns into a fable in the sense that the vagina becomes alive and
Separated from the rest of the body.
Right, and then it has a journey of its own and adventures of its own, and it like does things. It goes to the zoo, it goes to the museum, it goes to on talk shows, and I mean, it doesn't talk. It's a vagina, like a loose vagina in the middle of New York City. And she, is chasing it, and in the process of chasing it, is figuring out the whole, like what happened and who she is without it, and why like it doesn't belong out there by itself, and how it would feel to be together again. So by the time she's finally reunited, and they are one body, they are really happy to be together, and a completely new person, a completely new, sense of self. Yeah, so that's that book.
That was when you were in India, and you were in India for 3 years. What kind of work did you do when you were out there?
Well, I wrote, because that's, so mostly I wrote, but I did a lot of textile, like if you want to talk about, the visual art practice, it was a lot of textile work because I fell in love with their fabrics, and I learned how to like dye fabric and, make thread, and then I collected so much, all that, wherever I went. And I think that it strongly affected my sense of color and femininity. And my spiritual practice, expanded, and I also became a vegan and a yogi and all this stuff.
Life-changing.
Yeah, pretty life-changing. I wrote a film script. Again, it's always in the same themes. So everything that I think that I've ever done is on these few themes. So when people are like, why do you do so many different, like your work is so not consistent, you paint, you do charcoal, you do embroidery, you write books, you write columns, you write, now you have a podcast. Why are you doing the podcast? And, it's almost like Western medicine. Oh. It's okay.
Water?
I inhaled some more.
So funny.
How many more minutes?
I feel like it's kind of like Western medicine. I think that's where you're at.
Right. How many minutes have I been non-stop?
No, it's beautiful. I think we're good on time. I think we have like 8 minutes left. We've gone through your
Perfect.
studious journey. We stopped at Western medicine.
Oh my God.
Breathe in and out.
It's okay. Take your time.
I'm so sorry.
It will stop. It will stop. You'll solo normally again. It's okay.
Oh,
What else would you like to squeeze in?
sometimes the air conditioning is really bothering me.
Here.
Yeah, it's a little allergy thing.
We'll pick up where you said Western medicine, and then we'll connect those things.
Is there something missing that you need to have in your interviews?
I think we'll just probably retract back to where you left off
Oh
with the
my
Western
God.
medicine and being
I
in
should
India.
talk about the podcast.
And then
That's all I got to
connecting us-
plug.
Well, connecting to how you made it to Miami.
Oh,
the journey,
yeah.
the journey here, why here,
Yeah,
and
okay.
then the podcast for sure. We want to talk about the podcast. I'm so excited
Okay.
about that. That's like, this is a platform for you.
Okay.
You have, she has a mental. There you go.
Oh,
I was
perfect.
thinking about the podcast. Yeah, we should talk about the podcast. Wow, that just flew at me.
Girl, I don't know.
Yeah, you got so red.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm glad it wasn't me.
No,
Your
I
body-
had a really bad bronchitis for a long time, but it was over.
This wasn't as bad as when, what was it? Gabby was here. And you had to walk away. I kept on talking.
No, I really. But that was different because I still have my
Yeah.
bronchitis, but I don't really have a bronchitis.
No, I think this is just allergic. I mean,
Allergic?
yeah, I think that you swallowed wrongly, and then whatever you swallowed hit a spot that
And it
created
was
an allergic.
scratching me.
Right, yeah.
I hear
The AC again.
Schauspieler.
Oh, tears and everything. These are the behind the scenes. Since we're still recording. Better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, great.
I'm just gonna do
Okay.
my
Well, I press play.
recolor. Okay. I'm crying. Like.
Take a minute. It's okay. I mean, nobody. You guys are not in a rush, are you?
No.
Okay. You can have like 5 minutes and become like human again.
Instead of a red tomato.
Yeah, don't force yourself. It's okay. We're not live. I'm live.
Wow.
Mine is live. Yeah, I know, but I like it live.
Where does it go when it's live?
Well, it's a live radio program on Jolt,
Okay, fine.
Yeah, you can't
So-
cough when you're alive.
and it's just me. But I like it.
Yeah, we're too boring for ourselves. We're only entertaining together.
I mean, the thing that I like is, yeah, it puts me more on my game. when
You're
it's
like a
live.
performance.
Yeah, so I'm sure it's flawed, but it's okay. Like, you know, I also like, I like raw art. You know, I don't like over
Like
processed.
fake or whatever. I know we've had people ask us like, do we edit? And the reality is, we could edit.
You could edit
and
so
stuff,
easily.
but it's just not genuine. I feel
I
like
agree.
it's about what's happening here in the present, and we do try to keep it at 50. So we have had people pause because of a phone call or a family thing or
Right.
something, but regularly, it whatever we capture, and there's so many different outlets for people to sit down with somebody else. That's cool too. Western medicine.
Where did we stop?
It's a little like Western medicine.
Okay.
Western medicine in the sense that, you know, the Western doctor sees the individual things that are wrong, and then will send you to like 10 specialists for your eyes or your skin, and they can't see the whole picture, right? So a little bit, we compartmentalize so much under the effect of big technology and, you know, kind of organizing everything, right, which is all delusional, that we miss the full picture. So no one really looks closely to see that I am just talking about one thing only. Since I've been saying anything, it's one consistent, like, beyond obsessively consistent practice, artistic practice in different media, because I'm trying to say it in as many ways as I can come up with. But it's just the same thing. If anything, I can't go beyond it. I just can't. So the podcast that I'm doing now is part of for me, it's part of my practice, 100%. It's just art. It's just another way of using language and being in the moment and being raw and including the audience, so I can interview anyone. You know, part of what I like about it is that I have a lot of people who come anonymously who just want to talk about their lives, about their problems, their sex problems. Yesterday I did an hour where I called like 5 of my girlfriends and read questions from the audience that I've been getting for the past 2 months, and then we all answered them in real time, right? So being a live show, it's just more intense. The focus is more intense, yeah. But also it's unpredictable what people will say, because they come on, you know, I'll talk to them in advance and they'll be like, oh, I want to talk about this and this and this, and I'm like, sure. And I know by now, having done it enough times, that they have no clue how they will behave. You know, some of them clam up, some of them can't say anything, some say the opposite, some can't shut up and say everything that they wanted to keep personal. So I have like these masks from, you know, these Venetian ball masks from like the plague years, copies of those, the clay masks. So the people who want to be anonymous wear the mask.
Oh, that's fine.
And are in the photo, masked. And they have like pseudonyms. So I'm interested again in the reason that I felt compelled to do it is because of the Me Too movement, and it changed my way of understanding my own sexual life. And I wish I could say sexual practice, but I can't because it's not conscious enough. I wish it were. Maybe it will become now.
Never know.
Right? I'm working on it so hard, sisters. So I felt that no matter what I've been saying and thinking and, you know, fighting and practicing and working and churning, I still was male gazing during sex and was aroused by male gazing. You know, I looked at my own body as if I were a guy, and that turned me on. It was objectifying myself. There was some pimping going on by me, on me, right? That I wasn't, hadn't been quite conscious of. And then I felt, okay, we just have this moment where in the Western world, it's the first time in written history that women get to give verbal consent. It's fucking huge and we can't let it go, yeah? And we have to hold on to it and then grow from it. Like we say yes or no, and then since there is no language to sex, it's basically the only area of our lives that's not completely legislated by patriarchy. And it's words and meanings, and so we women could go on and negotiate the sexual contract and name things and get that openness and get our sexual power back, which is the only power we really have over the male, gender. And it's the power that patriarchy has been so fucking terrified of. Get that power back. And we can, because genetics finally, can prove paternity with a simple DNA test. So the men do not have to own us and keep us in the harem under lock and key, so it will be their babies that we carry, right? So there is other proof to liberate men from that anxiety, and also, the kind of progress that we've made, such as it is, in transactional provider sex, with like divorce law and whatever, has put a lot of real life pressure on men to maybe let go. So it seems that a lot of circumstances are coming together for a shift. And I just wanted to find an outlet to say this. And the podcast was a way to just speak in real time about it, like once a week for 2 hours.
Wow.
And bring in people, and to say their narratives.
And also actively take that, not just take that part back, but I think actively engage, because like a lot of people you see them on Facebook or commenting on whatever social media they're, but it's an activation of the energy and actually discussion with the public,
Yeah.
It's about the connecting, I think.
Yeah.
Our question, I guess, one of the ones before Maria asked her question is, why Miami? What has made you stay here for this long?
Oh.
And when did you come here?
Yeah. Why Miami is a good question, because everybody talks shit about Miami in numerous ways, and I'm not going to. I could, but we all know that part. I lived in New York for over 20 years, and I got the winter blues and the kind of overwhelming thing of New York performance anxiety. I'm so successful. I was on, talk shows, and I had a job as a staff writer at Spin magazine. So I sold a book to Scribner. I got a 6-figure advance. I paid it in full and bought myself a condo on the beach in the Deco Plage.
Awesome.
And I looked at the ocean, and I came here as often as I could. And then I became pregnant, and I didn't want to raise my daughter in my West Village rent control apartment. So I came here more and more. And by the time she had to go to school and I had to choose, I chose to raise her on the beach. And she's a beach girl, and she's a Cancer, so she needs stability a lot. She carries her home on her body and her emotions, everything. Yeah. So I felt like I didn't want to overwhelm her either with my personality, which can be a little, a bull in a china shop sometimes. So, here it was easier to pass because no one knew me. I hadn't worked here. So in the world of the moms, I was just Eve, and I stayed Eurydice in my practice, and I limited my practice, I shrunk it a lot and put it into the art center studio, and it worked great. She grew up in the studio. Her friends and she would always come there after school. They would run up and down Lincoln Road. They went to the art camp there, so they grew up. And also it was a great place for community building. A lot of the New World students for many years came to the studio and they hung out there for hours and hours because there weren't that many women artists working spaces where they could just sit around and be wanted, right? Yeah, so it created a lot of community because it was so accessible and safe, right? So their parents or everybody would allow them to be on Lincoln Road. I'm just going to Lincoln Road. I'm going to Eve's studio. Oh, okay. And it was interesting that even people who were completely outside the art world and were shocked and and tantalized by my naked female body, quickly grew accustomed to it and familiarized with it and embraced it, accepted it. And
open doors, totally.
Yeah.
But you got to have conversations with them, and I think in the conversations you get to melt a lot of that stuff away.
Exactly.
When did you transition from the art center to Fountainhead?
Well, the art center got sold. The board decided to sell it, which I think it was devastating to a lot of us in that art tribe. I had been fortunate to get some free spaces from Craig Robbins, so I got a schoolhouse for almost a year and a half, 2 years, that was about to be demolished in the design district for free, and I got some spaces before they got rented where I could work and then have an opening once a month for free, and that was nice. And then when all that dried up, I moved to the Fountainhead. But it was really isolated for me. I mean, it sustained the art community energy, which I needed. So for that was why I stayed for that. But I just missed the daily interaction with the people. Because it meant a lot to me, as a practitioner. I never liked to be so solitary, and that's another reason why the podcast, because it's a way to have
because you have these interactions again.
Yeah, with other artists and with the people who might be the public or viewers. But Miami, I love. Why I stayed in Miami. Yes, of course, the weather makes life easier, and I'm a Mediterranean. But it's really the transience. I'm kept interested and involved by by the fact that everybody has an accent. We all come from other places different places of the world, and people do not necessarily stay here too long. They're coming through, they're leaving, they're transitioning, they're snowbirding. I love all that. People are like, we don't want the snowbirds. We don't want our buzzer. I'm like, no, I love it personally.
Because it's a change.
Yeah,
right?
it's a constant.
Changing it up.
Yeah, it's a constant change, and you get access to so many different cultures without having to actually go there. Yeah, and I like the smallness of the beach. It's just like a small sliver of artificially created land, and yet it's populated by all kinds of
People from
right. You have I walk my dogs every night, and I run into the Hasids in the fur hats, and they're always there. And then there's the Brazilian crowd, and then there is the Eurotrash crowd. I mean, they go by block. Yeah. And there is a whole Russian constituency, really interesting. Because they are diverse within the Soviet satellites. So fascinating, and that's new. That's the newest, change, or the newest wave. Yeah. So and you learn so much about humanity if you're a student of people, and if you're a student of their history enough to put two and two together. that yeah, it's a place where you're constantly learning without necessarily having to leave. So I have been very happy here, and it's not high stress. I don't feel like I'm
Living
under
by the
pressure.
beach, I mean.
Yeah, financially especially, I'm not under so much pressure to perform and monetize.
Right on,
As
New York
elsewhere.
has that,
Yeah, we can
you know,
kind of
the-
like
yeah.
sail by. We can get by
Yeah.
without too much.
Maria has your final question. Can you say it?
Well, before the final question, do you have any
Oh yes.
events coming up? Any projects coming up?
When
that
does
you're
your
working on
podcast
right now?
play? Yeah.
Okay, I have interesting question. Sorry, I usually don't plug things, so I'm not gonna plug any art events. I do have some showings, but so what?
We'll connect
People
your-
can
we'll
go
connect
if they
your
want to
website.
go.
It can go on your
I'm not
website.
asking.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
We'll
But
connect your
the
website and our
podcast,
Facebook account.
my website and my Instagram. I do have an Instagram that's artwork only, and I'm fond of it because it kind of shows the span of the artwork. It's called Art Against All, which is my art business logo. I've had Art Against All Inc. I'm the only employee and the founder and the CEO. I've had it for 15 years. So it comes from that Herzog movie, Every Man for Himself and God Against All. So Art
So look
Against
her
All.
up, Art Against All on Instagram.
And you have my personal Instagram, and then I have something called scribal therapy, and the scribal therapy is really my scribal practice, which also I work with people on as a therapeutic tool of a consciousness changing tool through words, by taking words away from the patriarchy and exploring them. So it's very much a hands-on practice, and I handwrite, I typewrite, I stay away from all tech and media, and that is also consistent with the podcast, which I think is all the media. It's not like Big Brothery at all, and it's called Speak Sex. I just thought the word sex had to be there because people are so scared of it. I could have called it Speak Truth. I actually intended to, but I could have called it Speak Death and Die. And I could have but I just thought sex to demystify it. Because like everybody has sex, what's the big deal? Say it. So you have to say Speak Sex, like in public, to even, and subscribe to Speak Sex. Ooh. It's live, it's Fridays, 2 to 4 p.m. on joltradio.org. And then I post it as a podcast on like Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and all Mixcloud, SoundCloud, I don't know.
Amazing.
All the podcast platforms.
That's excellent.
I hope I can just keep doing it because I'm learning so much
much.
from it. Yeah.
We're excited for this new venture you're embarking on, and also you have several episodes in, I think.
Yeah, I have actually more, but I'm saving
Oh,
them.
you haven't? Oh.
Yeah.
I
I have more for when I go to Lesbos. 'Cause,
Nice.
yeah, I don't want to do it all like by phone, so I thought I'll have the studio ones too.
You'll upload this.
Yeah, because I migrate every summer. I go to my home.
Oh, nice.
Like a bird.
The very last question. You've been sitting on a magical rocking chair.
Mm.
It grants you 3 wishes. You can wish for anything and everything, but you have to say it out loud for it to come true.
That's how it works.
Those are the rules of the rocking chair. So what are your 3 wishes?
Health.
One. That's good.
Yeah. Keep the body healthy.
The most important one.
Yeah, right? Yeah. The mortal coil, whatever it's called, we gotta keep it nice and healthy and just up. So that's my first wish. I knew there was something magical when I sat in it, and it's like a muse. Like it's given me. I haven't stopped talking. It's like a complete download. Yeah, sit on the chair, download the info. Interesting. Like you could, get a lot of people to say their secrets on this chair. Okay, number 2 and number 3. I don't know. I just feel like I'm not very imaginative, but I have to be honest.
Honesty
Right?
is all that matters,
Magic,
totally.
you gotta be honest. do no harm. So, you know, change the world for the better.
That was good.
Yeah, get women to love themselves more and
That's a big one.
yeah, and kind of be nice to the planet.
Very crucial.
Yeah,
Those are good wishes, Alex.
yeah.
Thank you so much for sitting.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having
so
me.
much.
I loved
Thank
it.
you.
And finally,
Thank you.
we have to reschedule a few times, but it was all meant to be. And here
Yeah.
you are, and
Thank
Yeah.
you.
it was
I loved it.
magical. That was
Yeah.
great. We loved it too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elisa.
Thank you,
Thank
Maria.
Oh,
Yay.
thank you. Thank you.
And we'll see you guys pretty soon with our next one.